All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our final installment of Speaking with the Black Educator Experts on Teaching Black History. Today, we actually have a wonderful guest who I've been looking forward to talking to for a long time, Dr. Travis Bristol from out in Berkeley, California, who is an expert on the importance of Black educators, particularly Black male educators. Dr. Bristol, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Rand, for the invitation and the opportunity to talk with you and with your fellow listeners.
Thank you. So again, I'm Rand Miller from the Urban Education Mixtape. We have been doing these chats throughout the month, speaking with numerous experts on the issue of teaching Black history. And today, again, we're talking to Dr. Travis Bristol with respect to educating the educators. So, Doc, I just wanted to ask you just off the top, to talk to us about your work, what you've been doing, and how you've gotten interested in the field of research with respect to the importance of Black teachers, Black male teachers in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I'm an assistant professor here at UC Berkeley in the Graduate School of Education. And my research looks at teacher education and educational policy, in particular, efforts to recruit, support, and retain teachers of color. Most of my work, some of my initial work focused on trying to understand, beyond recruiting Black male teachers, how do you support and how do you retain them? I come to this work, one, as a former public school teacher in New York City, who had some success with my students, but also recognized that part of my success with students wasn't simply because I was a Black man. It was because I had high quality preparation, and that there were elements and parts of the school, in terms of administration, colleagues, that made teaching in that school challenging. And so when I went to begin my doctoral program, Secretary of Education Arne Duncan had launched this Black male teacher recruitment campaign. And because of my own experience as a Black male teacher, I thought it was important to think beyond recruitment. What about support and retention? And one of the things that I have found in my own research is that our inability, school districts, state policymakers, their inability to pay attention to retention continues to inform why we see this growing demographic mismatch between Black students and Black teachers. And actually, we are seeing the percentage of Black male teachers continues to fall. When Secretary Arne Duncan launched that recruitment campaign in 2009, the number was about 1.9%. Currently, the percentage is 1.7%. And those data are based on the principal and I'll throw the link in here, the principal and school survey, the teacher and principal school survey. It's a national survey.
Wow, okay, all right. Can you talk to us briefly, first to start us off, on the evidence that details how Black teachers, Black male teachers in particular, help impact the academic performance of Black students in general?
So much of so when you say evidence, I think sometimes when we say evidence, we are thinking about quantitative research. I think it's important to start by saying that there is a long history, a rich history of qualitative research. Researchers like James Anderson, Vanessa Siddle Walker, who painted a picture of Black teachers during Brown or before Brown, who created positive schooling environments that attended to their Black students' social emotional needs in a country that had no capacity to love them. And I would say that I wonder our country's capacity currently to love Black children. But there's been a rich body of qualitative research where researchers have looked at how Black teachers have created supportive, culturally relevant, culturally sustaining environments that attended to Black children's social, emotional, and academic needs. Much more recently, we've had quantitative researchers who draw on causal and quasi-experimental methods who have found direct linkages between having a Black teacher and Black students performing better on standardized exams. One such study was Thomas Dee, who reanalyzed the Tennessee class size study and found that having a Black teacher for Black students increased achievement. Much more recently, we've had some research coming out of looking at North Carolina, that for students who had just one Black teacher, that student was less likely to have disciplinary interactions, was more likely to want to pursue college. Much of the research has looked specifically at Black teachers. We don't have a rich body or clear body of evidence linking specifically to Black male teachers. And so much of the evidence is around Black teachers broadly.
Okay. So now I have a question. So I'm in New Jersey. I'm local to New Jersey, about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. And there's a local school district, Terry Hill in New Jersey, and they recently became the first school district in the state to mandate an African American history course. And so, rightfully so, they're being applauded for it. But I wanted to ask you, what is the importance of, when we're talking about teaching a Black history course, which in this case is mandated for graduation, what is the importance of having a Black teacher teach that course, or does that not really matter as much as a teacher having the proper competency to teach that course? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's important to say first, it goes without saying that Black history is American history. Yeah. We landed on Plymouth Rock, but Plymouth Rock also clearly landed on us. But and so Black people, people of African descent, have built this country. So I think that we have run into danger when we have disentangled this thing called Black history from American history. So that's one piece. I think it also goes without saying that just because you are Black doesn't necessarily mean that you can teach Black history, right? I mean, Black people, we live in a society that is anti-Black, that has centered whiteness. And so if Black people are going through their K-12 schooling where whiteness is centered, where they aren't learning their history, then what makes it, they can't teach it just because they're Black, right? You can't just have experiential, you can't just experience Blackness in order to sort of teach it. So I think that's the second thing. I think that anyone can teach if they are taught. So anyone, Black, white, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, anyone, right? If they are taught, can teach. And I applaud school districts that are taking the first step of setting aside this way of thinking about history and calling it Black history. But I think that in the best of all possible worlds, we will see American history as incorporating Black history, and so we don't need something separate.
I have a quote that you said back in 2016 from the Education Week article. You were talking about culturally sustaining pedagogy. You said it's an essential mindset and tool for increasing student engagement and learning. So I just wanted to ask, where does the cultural sustaining pedagogy piece fall in line when we're talking about teaching Black history as American history? We're talking about teaching students in general.
Mm-hmm. So culturally sustaining pedagogy, it's a term coined by Django Paris at the University of Washington. And Django builds off of Gloria Ladson-Billings' work, culturally relevant pedagogy. And what Django wants us to understand is that we shouldn't be organizing classrooms for these standalone units that honor one culture and then we move on, that it should be embedded, it's the same throughout really the life course of a student's 12 experience. And so I think thinking about how you allow students their funds of knowledge to be present in the classroom requires us to think about the dynamic nature of their culture and try to continuously infuse that into your everyday practices, right, in the classroom. But that requires a teacher first to like learn about it and know about it, you know.
Mhm. What's the role of, say, district leaders to really help facilitate this, right? When we talk about, we put a lot of onus on teachers. I know I have in the past, but, it's sort of letting those district administrators, whether they're principals or folks at the administrative level, off the hook. Where's their role in this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that one issue that we find is that we focus so much on teachers and teaching without thinking about leaders and leading. And if in order to build, in order to improve um, the, in order to improve schools as organizations, we have to think about how we incorporate learning for the adults in the organization. We focus solely and for too long, I think, only on teachers. I think now we're understanding the impact and the role of administrators. And so attending to how you support leaders, how you provide support to leaders, right? Who can then provide support to their teachers is really essential. So I think principals play a really key piece. I think we're seeing some emerging research that having strong principals. Well, I think that there's a growing body of research that actually having a strong principal can reduce teacher turnover. And actually, some of that research is also showing that strong and effective principals also is associated with increased student learning. So principals are really key. And I think that we have too long focused solely on one adult teacher without thinking about the other adults in the organization, particularly school leaders.
For Black educators who are looking to become principals, I've heard and spoken to a number of folks. I'm sure you have as well, to talk about the struggle of wanting to do just some of what you said, but being caught up in the sort of institutional norms or defaults that stress this idea of not so much going towards culturally sustaining pedagogies, but just teaching to test or preparing students to make sure that they can pass or be proficient. How do Black principals really try and, while at the same time ensuring that their students performing, are able to not get pigeonholed into the predictable nature of focusing on, making sure kids can pass this test, making sure that Black children in particular get disciplined. I don't want to be brought in here to be a disciplinarian. I want to actually be an instructional leader. What sort of tips would you have, or some things that you've seen in the research that could help Black principals in that area?
Yeah, so two things. I think that there was some research study that found that the challenge that actually Black assistant principals have with becoming principals, because they're positioned in ways that track them, that lead them out of the track to become principals, because their job title, their job description, how they're positioned in school is solely focused on discipline, that they never get to build the muscle or the expertise around the curricular piece. So they never actually become principals. So I think that's one piece to really, I think it's important to sort of name. I think that, my advice for an aspiring principal or current principal is to, if you're in a school district that isn't providing you with skills, tools, resources to become an instructional leader, that you find those skills, tools, and resources elsewhere. Um, the um, the the New York Leadership Academy is one great resource of of of, of developing principals, leadership expertise. So even though they have that name, I think they may have changed their name, but they're not focused only on New York. Folks, so I think that if you aren't in a space where you can build that instructional leadership muscle, that there are organizations like New Leaders for New Schools or the New York Leadership Academy, where you can build that instructional muscle because you are not, um, um, some of the things that give me pause about affinity groups for teachers of color is that there isn't also time to think about practice, and you're not going to become an effective teacher. I don't think you're going to become an effective school leader if you don't spend time building your practice, building your instructional expertise, your curricular expertise. And so it's going to be really essential that if those resources, those opportunities aren't being given to you, that you seek them out. And those are just two organizations that one could seek out.
What role does the sort of curriculum leaders play in this? So, we often talk about principals and teachers, but, one of the things that I've noticed in my experience is there aren't that many Black curriculum leaders, directors of curricula, whether it's elementary, high school, whatever, district-wide. Do those folks have a role? How is it the same sort of advice that you have with Black principals or Black people looking to become principals? The same true for Black educators looking to enter in that space as curriculum leaders? And sort of what can districts do to sort of help facilitate that, like you were talking about with respect to the principalships?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that districts can do is to spend time in the classrooms of Black teachers to identify how Black teachers are engaging and teaching their students. Black children aren't sitting in classrooms with Black teachers and learning solely because the person in front of them is Black. Black teachers are drawing on students as funds of knowledge. This is what the clear, rich body of research literature would say. Black teachers are demonstrating care work. They are engaging in care work. They are attending to their students' social and emotional needs. And so there's a lot that district leaders, that the field could learn if we recognize that Black teachers are actually curricular experts and not solely behavior managers or disciplinarians. And so, the body of there's a lot of researchers who draw attention to the instructional practices of Black teachers. Geneva Gay, Rich Milner, Marvin Lin, would draw attention to the instructional practices of Black teachers. And I think that if we spent more time in Black teachers' classrooms, not just sending misbehaving, quote unquote, misbehaving Black students to their classes, if we spent more time observing their practices, then we'll be able to develop a cadre of folks who could, reshape and help the district reimagine how they're teaching Black children.
For educators, whether they're at the district level leadership space or teachers who are looking to progress academically themselves, looking to enter, say, a master's program or a doctoral program, and they're interested in really making this work a part of their practice, what kind of program should they look at? I know folks think that I just got to get this master's, I got to get this bachelor's, or if this program talks about X, then it'll help me do X, but it's not that cut and dry. So if you're looking to do sort of the culturally sustaining pedagogical work, if you're looking to, really reach Black students of color, where should these educators look to go in terms of an academic program if they're looking to do master's and doctoral stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's so much variation in teacher preparation programs or doctoral programs. I mean, I think that what I tell aspiring or prospective doctoral students is that, you want to identify a faculty person, potential faculty mentor, like whose work is similar or whose work you want to maybe aspire to. And so If you're interested in culturally sustaining pedagogy, right, Django Paris at the University of Washington, right, might be one place. If you're interested in racial literacy, understanding how you attend to and support the range of, 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 of literacies that Black children bring, for example, to their classroom, right? Then Yolanda Silva Ruiz at Teachers College is, another place where you may want to go. Rita Coley here in California, Riverside, is doing some incredible work around the ongoing support, right, for teachers of color more broadly. So I think it's just really, I am, if you do a quick Google search of the Handbook of Research on Teachers of Color, I'm co-editing that handbook. I'm the second editor. The first lead editor is Conroy Gist, but in that handbook, we have the field sort of top researchers on teachers of color. So Dorinda Carter, for example, who's at Michigan State. And so just looking at some of the names of some of those folks and right, thinking about applying to their institutions potentially to work with them. Rita Bianco at the University of Colorado, Denver is doing some really incredible work around a program she calls Pathway to Teaching. So helping high schoolers think about teaching and giving them some initial credentials, right? And so I think that the Handbook of Research on Teachers of Color is one place that folks could look to just get a sense of who some of the individuals are in the field, and then they could begin to do some of their own research based on having those names to think about applying to the programs where those folks teach.
Let me ask you this question. This might be a difficult question, so take your time with it. Who is at fault, or more at fault for like this compartmentalizing of Black history and the lack of taking a culturally responsive or relevant approach to teaching? Do we really hone in on the teacher education programs? Do we hone in on districts when they get teachers, or is it just an issue of the system itself? This is the way we've always done it, and we're not going to change. We're used to doing it this way. Or is it a situation where, things are too big to fail, if you will? For example, textbook companies, standardized testing companies. Where do we look at sort of the origins of how we got here, and you sort of discuss some ways that we can get out of it, but at the root of it, where can we look to get a better understanding of why we're in this space?
So, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the 1619 Project, I think, is a really important resource because, the root of the problem begins when European Americans, right, landed in Jamestown, arrived to this place, right, that they would soon call America, and began to enacted mass genocide against the indigenous people, and then brought people of African descent and enslaved them. I mean, I think that's where, and so the root of the problem is around elevating and centering whiteness, and then creating science and religion that centered whiteness, and pushed anyone who was not white, right, sort of to the margins. And so, and that was the start of the American Project. So that's where the problem, I think the root of the problem. And so I think understanding that's how we started can inform, right, how we can change. And so efforts like ethnic studies, projects like, this school district in New Jersey who's doing this Black, history, is a way to bring the experiences of people who are not white to children's consciousness to the center. And I think that's really huge and really important and crucial.
Say to leaders or district leaders who will point to efforts of DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as a way to sort of tackle what you're talking about? Is that something that you would agree with, or do you think that it's something that should be amended? Because I think a lot of leaders think that when they're dealing with the issues of diversity and equity, that they're, tackling some of those culturally sustaining issues, some of those pedagogical issues. What would you say to that?
There's a question, what do I say to the diversity, equity, and inclusion folks?
So to those folks or the leaders that believe that that route is the way to achieve some of the things that you discussed today.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. There was a study that found that many of the DEI folks ultimately leave their jobs because they are not empowered to do anything, right? It's just, they're just tokens, if you will. You can't create, so I think that, that you need someone who's calling attention to the racial climate in an organization. I think that that's important, but that person has to be empowered to actually make real change. And if the leader of the organization, the superintendent, isn't demonstrating to other people in the district that he, she, or they is going to take up those ideas from the DEI person and implement them, both using carrots and sticks, right? If that doesn't happen, and if that's not clearly communicated, then that person just becomes a figurehead. You need, I think about you need someone calling out the problems in the organization. I think that we're seeing this. I don't know if you've been seeing some of this, the Henry Louis Gates stuff recently on the Black church. I mean, the Black church has really held this country to task, or reminded this country that of its promises unfulfilled. And I think that you need someone like that in an organization, but that person has to be empowered and to really shift in the culture of the organization.
How do parents help support that calling to task, right? So I'm just thinking about parents who are, right now maybe a little anxious with regards to everything that's going on in the country and sort of how that's being dealt with within schools. And there have been numerous articles that have come out, stories in the news that talk about the lack of cultural competence of educators with respect to not only teaching, but just in terms of community. What can parents do to ensure that if there is someone who's hired in that position, or the district in general is sort of going in the direction of making sure that they're not only calling out, but actually addressing some of the issues that are within districts?
Mm-hmm. Parents have a lot more power than, I'm a parent, right? 2 Black children, a lot more power than we think we do. I would say that the first step is to organize. There's something about critical mass, right? Getting together with a group of other folks. My colleague, Kerry Rodriguez, who runs the National Parents Union, I think is a great example of what happens when parents organize and say enough is enough. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I would say that parents should not go alone. They should go in numbers and make their demands very clear, because, as Richard Douglas reminds us, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Where, or let me ask this question, I'll go in a different direction. Staying with parents, how might parents really look at this notion of making sure that not only that their school is doing their part, but that they're even doing their part with their own students at home? Certainly with remote learning and COVID-19 pandemic, a lot more parents are in the driver's seat, if you will. And so if there's a parent who is unsure of what they need to do or how to leverage some of the talking points that you we've mentioned here today, where could they go? What are some resources that they could find that could possibly help them with, say, the culturally sustaining pedagogy, or utilizing their experiences or knowledge to support their students' learning?
Yeah. So yeah, again, I really think that the National Parents Union that Carrie Rodriguez runs can be a really good resource for how to organize. But I think that um, one of the interesting things about this Zoom learning or the platforms that because children are learning at home, parents have a unique opportunity to get some insight into what their children are learning, and what they may need to, the gaps that they need to fill in terms of history, for example, that the school curriculum may be leaving out. And so, um, so one, having conversations, right, with your child is really important. If you are privileged enough, right, and at home, maybe listening in every now and again on what your child might be learning, asking and inviting yourself into your child's classroom. So for Black History Month, for example, in my daughter's class, who's a fourth grader, I came and I read James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing, his first poem, and I had a class discussion with students. So, I think inviting yourself, thinking about, you don't have to read a poem, you can just bring some artifact that is representative of your culture, right? And ask the teacher if you could talk about it, right? I think surely during Zoom teaching, teachers, are looking for special guests to come in. So I think that should be fine.
Going back to school leaders in schools, what role do they have, or is it important for them to sort of establish a pipeline for teaching, particularly amongst Black students, considering the research, considering some of the things we discussed today? Should school leaders really take an active role, or is that something that should happen more organically? I know that there are a number of different programs throughout the country where there are pipelines for teaching coming out of high school. I know that there are a couple here in New Jersey. In fact, Rowan University runs a similar pipeline for Black and Brown students. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, is that Project Impact?
Yes, Project Impact, yes.
Yeah, I know Monica Seeley.
Yeah,
very well. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So I of course principals have a responsibility, but before you can encourage people to enter the teaching profession, you have to stop disciplining them. You have to stop sending them and expelling them, right? So you can't on the one hand encourage people to come and become a teacher if you're also disproportionately suspending and expelling them, right? Those two don't quite work. So I think the first step is to think about how you as a principal are creating a learning environment in your school where you that might attract someone to come and want to work there. So if you aren't doing that, like as a school leader, then any program that you design to get people to want to come into teaching is not going to work, because they are going to associate school dysfunction and teaching with you, dysfunctional principal, the ineffective principal.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm thinking about when I got into teaching, it was something that I didn't necessarily think about, but I got in it. And once I got there, I really began to enjoy it, but then I struggled a little bit. And one of the things that I struggled with was what you had mentioned earlier, this idea of trying to sort of use your experience as a way to manifest teaching, if you will. And so then that's where some burnout started to come. And it wasn't until I really got into the mood and sort of got the support. And I'm saying all that to ask this question next. What do you say to teachers, particularly Black teachers here, or teachers of color in general? What do you say to them when we know that passion drives a lot of Black teachers to get into the profession, even Black principals. What do you say to those who may, as you mentioned earlier, possibly use some of that experience as a means to guide their teaching and guide their practice? What do you say to them, and how to actually go from shifting from that direction to actually shifting to a direction where we're actually using good teacher practice to really lead what we do in the classroom?
I mean, you're not going to become a good teacher if you don't attend a high quality teacher prep program. And you're not, teaching is a skill, like riding a bike is a skill. And so if you are not taught the skill, you're not going to be good at the skill. So, and I don't think that it's a skill that can be learned in 6 weeks. I think that if you want to become an effective teacher for your students, you have to attend a teacher preparation program that gives you some theory, gives you some opportunities to put that theory into practice. So that's 6 months or ideally a year of a practicum experience where you're getting feedback from both the classroom teacher and from someone from the university. Right? I mean, this isn't new, but these are all of the components needed to train a high quality teacher. And so I think that if you have the passion, right? Like I had the passion, when I was in college, I had the passion. I wanted to, teach children who came from similar experiences as me. But it wasn't until I went to my 12-month teacher training program that I was able to learn how to put that passion into practice by learning how to develop a lesson plan, learning how to develop assessments, learning how to assess students, and then design new content based on what students know or did not know, right? And so you have to learn this, like attending a teacher preparation program. Good teachers aren't born, but made.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question I've asked all of our panelists that we've had over the course of the month. I want to share with you also. In light of the insurrection that we saw on January 6th, students that I've talked to had just had a lot of questions as to why, how, and I'm not in the capacity to formally teach. I run an after-school program, but I have spoken with students in that regard. What is your sort of advice or any suggestions you have for teachers that are being approached by students with these questions, or if they want to engage in discussions and lessons to help students understand how we got to this place? What would be a suggestion or two that you have for them in terms of how to help explain it and use best practice to do so?
Yeah. So maybe I can talk, I teach an undergraduate class here at UC Berkeley, and the first day of class, which was a couple of days after the insurrection, we started out by reading James Baldwin's Talk to Teachers. And in that piece, Baldwin says that there will be almost essentially violence when you try to help the country come back or live up to its ideals. And so, and so what was very helpful for my students was assisting them to understand that what we saw, right, is this country really fighting with itself, with white people really fighting with a racial reckoning, if you will, around the ideals of this country. And so I think that, for example, the James Baldwin piece, right, be really me and my, but it's also to name that how fearful white people are, some white people are, right, of a project that no longer centers them. You had in President Biden saying that he was going to have his most senior leadership team reflect this, the ethno-racial diversity of this country, right? So you had someone challenging the American project that was decentering whiteness. And so that causes great fear, great anger when this country tries to live up to its ideals, as this country is trying, right, to be this more perfect union that it has professed to be.
Last question for you, Doc. Last question. There was, and I'm sure you probably heard, a school in Utah that allowed parents to opt out, if you will, of any Black history lessons or Black history events, and then they changed course. They went ahead and said, no, we're bringing everybody back in. Put yourself in the position, they call you in as a consultant. They want you to come and sort of diffuse sort of what happened and help support them in dealing with not only the backlash, but sort of how to go about dealing and teaching Black history. But you may have a different agenda. How do you approach that situation?
Yeah, so I'll end where I started. That we have this unfortunate idea in this country that Black history is not American history, and I think once we solve that, right, once we embed the experiences of Black people into the history of our country, then you won't have this idea that it's February, and so we just focus on the history of people who look like me or who look like you, right? But we have to think about how we sustain it throughout the life course of K-12 education. And until we get to that point, then you have people believe, right, that you have schools who only believe that they should teach it for 28 days over the course of the year. And then you have parents believe that it's just something that you only do for 28 days out of the school year.
How do we, I know I said the last question, this is my last one. How do we, and this is off the education topic, how do we sort of engender that sort of desire amongst the populace, if you will, or how do we build momentum for that, for there to be again, a desire for Black history to be seen as American history, not only to be taught during 28 days, but to be seen as something that's integrated throughout the entire curricula, regardless of not just history, but literature, the sciences, those sort of things. How do we sort of build that momentum?
Mm-hmm. So I think it has to come from the top down and from the bottom up. So what we saw, and I think this, could be a really interesting time to do this. So I think this is an important window. So if you may remember during Race to the Top during the Great Recession, when states were strapped financially, the Obama administration gave states money if they adopted certain standards, Common Core state standards, right? Where in those standards, students had to read, or they had to read expository texts, right? They had to essentially fundamentally change how we taught students the kinds of math, the kinds of reading, the kinds of writing. And if states did that, then they would receive this pot of money. I think that this is a unique opportunity in some of this, in the upcoming stimulus bill that's making its way through both chambers of Congress, for there to be included a rewriting, if you will, of the true American history that's tied, right, to receiving resources from the federal government. And I think that because of the financial, so that becomes the both carrot and the stick, right? Children are looking around and they're saying, no, it's not a war of northern aggression. No, we don't need to have these Confederate statues, right? If you lost the war, you don't get to be memorialized in a public space. And so we have children, people saying that there's something wrong here. And you have leaders who are recognizing that white people have been fed a lie and they believe that whiteness is the center of this country. And so when they don't see that happening, then they revolt. So we actually have to teach white people. So that has to come from the top. And I think we see some the urgency from communities saying that there's something wrong, something needs to be done, and they need resources, right? So I think this is a unique opportunity, I think, to really change how we're teaching a more true American history.
Where can they find you? Where can our folks find you? Social media, whether it's any speeches or talks that you've done, where can folks locate you online?
Yeah, I think a quick Google search, Travis Bristol, will pull up much of my videos. And my faculty webpage has lots of links to my articles at UC Berkeley. So just a quick Google search will pull up stuff on me and how folks can find me.
Cool. Well, thank you, sir. This has been a really awesome conversation, a lot of fruit, a lot of gems taken from you here. So we definitely appreciate you. And for those of you who may be here, those that will catch this later on, we appreciate you watching. Thank you again, Dr. Travis Bristol. This brother right here is awesome. He knows his stuff. He's on top of it. Definitely appreciate you, sir, for taking some time out. I know the weather out there is beautiful. It's nothing like the East Coast. So I know if you're taking moments in your time to not be outside and enjoying the weather, I'm definitely appreciative. So thank you, sir, so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care. And goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining us.